Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this online event on the Green Agenda for the Western Balkans. My name is Louise van Schaik and I'm the head of unit for the EU and Global Affairs unit here at Clingendael, and I'm also the coordinator of the research on climate change. I will moderate the event of today. Today, we will be discussing the prospects of the Green Agenda for the Western Balkans. With the SOFIA declaration on the Green Agenda, the leaders of the region have committed to align with the EU's climate policies and decarbonization targets. A specific green agenda for the Western Balkans was agreed upon since the starting point of the Western Balkans is less favorable when compared to the EU 27. The region, in fact, suffers from severe air pollution and little energy diversification. Apart from Albania, where hydropower is dominant, the Western Balkan countries are highly reliant on coal and lignite for their electricity production. And much of it is produced in outdated plants. On average, Western Balkans coal plant emits 20 times more sulfur dioxide and 16 times more particulate matter than EU coal plants. This has strong adverse effects on the environment and public health. And it also means that the Western Balkan countries are not contributing enough to the Paris Agreement on climate change. It also means that a gap is emerging between the EU and the countries that would like to become a member of the European Union, something which is undesirable from an enlargement perspective. In this webinar, we will discuss whether the Green Agenda can be an effective tool to promote climate and environmental agendas in the Western Balkans, but also how it can promote further regional integration with the EU and work in the interest of the EU accession process. There is an incredible lot to discuss, and for that we could not have a better lineup of speakers. First, I would like to ask you to give a warm welcome to Christina Naunova. She is a Climate and Energy Policy Officer for the Western Balkans at Climate Action Network Europe, CAN Europe. I would also like to welcome Stine Rasmussen. She is the Policy Officer in the International Relations Unit responsible at DG Klima, the Directorate for Climate Action of the European Commission, and responsible there for the Western Balkans. Welcome also to Radovan Nikcevic. He is the connectivity expert in charge of the Green Agenda at the Regional Cooperation Council. As very often is the case, there are organizations that translate policies to the more operational level, and that's exactly what they are doing at the RCC. So we can probably learn a lot from Radovan about what's actually going on with the Green Agenda in the Western Balkans. And last but not least, I would like to introduce my colleague Wouter Zweers. He's a research fellow at Clingendael, and he is also the coordinator of the Balkans Hub, a project in which Clingendael cooperates with organizations from the region in joint research and events. This webinar is broadcast live via Zoom and via YouTube, and I would like to welcome all participants. Thank you for your interest in this event. For those that have joined via Zoom, if you have any questions or comments for us to focus on in this debate, please type them in the Q&A function of Zoom. Please also note to which speaker you would like to address your question. My colleague Giulia Creti will monitor the Q&A and will try to pose as much as possible your questions to the speakers. Now, before we move to our first speaker, I would like to let you know that together with regional partners, Clingendael is preparing a set of papers on the Green Agenda of the Western Balkans. The first paper that we have written together with Christina Naunova has already been published on our website with the fantastic title, Energizing Enlargement. We are thankful to the Open Societies Foundation who sponsor our Balkan Hub work. Let us move right to you, Kristina. Together with Wouter and with Giulia Creti from Clingendael, you delved into the prospects of the Green Agenda. Also, you are working on climate-related issues on a daily basis for Climate Action Network Europe from Skopje. I wanted to start with a perhaps somewhat blunt question to you. There is a lot of talk about climate change momentarily, but don't the Western Balkan countries have other priorities on their agenda? Aren't there bigger issues to tackle, like the rule of law or socio-economic issues or the COVID-19 crisis? It would be very interesting to hear from you.
Thank you, Louise. And first of all, I would like to say good afternoon to everyone who is in attendance, both on Zoom and the YouTube broadcast. Just a very brief thank you also to the Clingendael Institute for organizing this event. And it's a great pleasure to be part of this panel. And just to go into the question very fast, I would like to say, yes, there is a lot of talk on climate change. And I think we all know that there is an obvious reason for that. We are facing a climate emergency on a global level, and we have less than a decade to actually take action to avert dangerous climate change and disasters that are followed with it. And the Western Balkans, unfortunately, is predicted to be one of the regions in Europe that is going to be most hit by this negative effect of climate change. We're already experiencing severe floods and more frequent droughts, forest fires, water shortages, some of the examples of what could happen in the future. So my immediate answer would be that, notwithstanding other challenges, the Western Balkan countries must take serious and immediate action to reduce their emissions and also to adapt to the negative effects of climate change that we already know that are going to happen. Because we believe that any inaction on climate change at this moment would only cause more problems in the future. For example, if we relate this to the COVID-19 pandemic and the related emergency that it caused, we see that it very fast it caused like this broader social crisis, and the same thing is expected to happen with the climate crisis. So I believe that, and we also point this in our policy brief that you mentioned, that the climate change problem is a systemic issue, and if it's not addressed properly and timely, it can only deepen over the existing socioeconomic challenges, especially in the Western Balkans. And I believe that this is a very unique opportunity to try to converge climate action with other important reforms and processes that are also aligned and relevant with the EU accession of the region, like, for example, the democratization. We can see many opportunities here, like, for example, if we include civil society in the implementation of the green agenda, it could help maybe create a more vibrant civil society. If we have more investment in renewable energy, it can help create new jobs and solve some of the social problems. And even more important, you mentioned the health crisis and health issues in connection maybe also to the COVID-19, but in more general, decarbonization in the Western Balkans would also mean depollution, especially air quality, improvement of air quality, because that has been a problem for several decades already. And phasing out coal will also improve this situation. So I see these things intertwined. Climate action and other challenges could be tackled together.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks. So that's quite a clear answer to my questions. Yes, it is also for the Western Balkans an important issue. So to what extent do you think that the green agenda as it is here today will actually be effective in fostering decarbonization? Is it really going to happen? Is it going to be an effective mechanism for catalyzing the energy transition?
Yes, that is a very important question. And I think that the green agenda, through the green agenda and the SOFIA declaration, the governments of the Western Balkan countries have made like a very important political commitment to work on climate action and also to align with the European Union climate neutrality goal by 2050. And that is a very ambitious goal. It's not an easy task. Decarbonization is going to happen in the Western Balkans. The question is how soon and how costly it will be. And I would say that the green agenda has potential to speed up this process. but two things will be most important here. The first of which will be that the green agenda and the actions taken through the green agenda need to align with other processes that are already in motion in the Western Balkans. And those are the energy transition and decarbonization. We know that in the Western Balkans, they're already fostered through the energy community. So in my opinion, the green agenda should be very well fitted into this already existing framework. And the second point, I think, will be how will the action plan look like? We know that the action plan for implementation is currently being drafted by the Regional Cooperation Council. And in my opinion, I would like to see that the action plan have a very concrete proposals and projects based on the pathways that are already set for the energy community. So that would mean investments and targeted plans to promote, first of all, energy efficiency and renewable energy in the Western Balkans. And I think here it's also important to mention that this investment should not should not be very high when it comes to fossil gas, because we know that this is very dangerous. It can cause a lot, it could cause another lock-in effect for the Western Balkans from one fossil fuel to another. So if it is a transition fuel, then we need to see it as a transition fuel, and all the investments going into gas should not crowd out investments in renewable energy. So that is very important. And also I would like to see certain specific mechanisms to ensure how the energy transition is also going to be just transition. So we need this to ensure that decarbonization will not further exacerbate the socioeconomic issues in the Western Balkans.
All right, yeah, thanks. So a lot hinges also on this action plan for implementation, which I'm sure that Radovan will also talk about later. And you are a bit cautious from Can Europe perspective, an NGO, that gas is still presented or treated as a transition fuel, whereas probably in the end of the day, it's not a solution. And that's, of course, a debate that we also see across the EU and in many other parts of the world as well. I wanted to zoom in on two specific pieces of legislation that are expected to be coming out or adjusted mid-July. So the Commission is expected to present mid-July its Fit for 55 package. That means basically how the EU translates its political commitment to reduce emissions by 55% in 2030 to concrete policy legislative proposals. And a very important one is the revision of the EU emissions trading scheme that covers big industry in the EU and sets a target for them that it gradually goes down. And the other one is a proposal for a carbon border adjustment mechanism that is going to probably set a price for products that are imported, for which, if they were produced in the EU, a carbon price would have been paid, for instance, through this emissions trading scheme. It's basically an external mirror to the emissions trading scheme. And in the green agenda, you actually see the idea that the Western Balkans could probably become part of the EU emissions trading scheme. And in that way, they would, of course, also avoid the carbon border adjustment measure. How do you look at this issue, and what do you think the Western Balkans will eventually do with regard to this, either integration into ETS or facing CBAM, or maybe not doing both?
Yes, thank you for this question. I think this is a very important topic because we know carbon pricing we don't have carbon pricing right now in the Western Balkans. So as you say, also, this is not only a crucial moment for the European Union regarding climate ambition. I think this is also crucial for the Western Balkans because the 2030 targets and the subsequent legislative framework through the energy community, they're also transposed in the Western Balkans as well. So I think regarding the emission trading scheme, it has proved to be very effective when it comes to reducing emissions in the European Union. And there is also some suggestions by research that it could be actually a more effective tool in the Western Balkans to reduce emissions as well in comparison to the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So extension of the European trading scheme to the Western Balkans emission trading scheme would be favorable. But of course, the preparation for that will at least take several years for the countries to be technically ready to take on this task. So in that regard, I think that the Western Balkans will probably not be able to escape the carbon border adjustment mechanism. But here, I think that then we should be very careful on how we see the carbon border adjustment mechanism, because we know that its purpose, it's not only to stop carbon leakage, its purpose is also to foster climate action outside the European Union. Then I think the carbon border adjustment mechanism, especially towards the Western Balkans, should not cause any more division, and should not have negative effects to, especially we know, the fragile Western Balkan economies. So I believe that the carbon border adjustment mechanism could be a positive tool if the revenues from it are used maybe to invest in the region again, maybe to invest in green energy, to speed up the transformation away from coal, also to provide the help to have this faster inclusion into the EU ETS, and also to aid just transition, because as I said before, citizens, especially in the coal regions, will need support, and also marginalized citizens experiencing high levels of energy poverty. So all these issues need to be taken into account when the carbon border adjustment mechanism towards the Western Balkans is planned. But yes, I support that definitely there needs to be carbon pricing in the Western Balkans. We just need to find the right mechanism.
Yeah, wow, this is clearly a tricky issue. That's probably not the last word has been said about. I can imagine that it will be cumbersome. Actually, I worked in Brussels when the first ETS was implemented in the EU, and it took also a lot of time, and there were also some hiccups at the start. And it's certainly not easy. On the other hand, there are a few other countries that are already, of course, also participating in the ETS. So that brings me to thank you, Kristina, for now. And then we will move on to talk to Stina Rasmussen from DG Klima, and responsible there, amongst others, for climate-related bilateral relations with the Western Balkans. So interesting times, almost ready for the Fit for 55 package launch. Well, still about a month to go. The EU is going full ahead with its own climate policies. Do you think that the best Western Balkans countries can still catch up with the EU in terms of climate ambitions and climate policies, Stina, if I may ask?
Hello, Louise. Hello, everybody. And thank you for inviting me to this event. A short answer would be yes, Louise, I think that we can, but I will try to elaborate a bit on that, although it is difficult to make it short. I have no doubt that they can. I think that the biggest issue is political will. You could take a country such as North Macedonia as an example and have a look at their NDC that they have submitted to
the NDC, the nationally determined contribution, also known as NDC, that they have submitted to the UNFCCC, and this is an obligation under the Paris Agreement. And if you have a look at North Macedonia's nationally determined contribution, it's actually difficult to say. I'm not used to saying it. I prefer NDC, but if you have a look at their NDC, it's surprisingly ambitious. I believe it's around 51%.
If you compare that to the EU, we have an NDC of 55%. So in reality, we're not that far from each other. Now, the really interesting question, and this also leads back to something that Kristina said, is implementation. So it's quite, in a sense, easy to have an ambitious NDC, but you also need to implement it. And I think that this is the main issue when we're talking the Western Balkans. Unfortunately, we don't have all the updated NDCs from the Western Balkans. We do have some, and they are not all ambitious, unfortunately. And I think that this is something that the countries will really, really need to look into in the very near future. What else did I want to say concerning this? I think that would be it. I think that it's really, really, really important that these countries start to live up to the promises that they have made. Because also, like Kristina said, we are way behind. But it's not only the Western Balkans that are behind and are not living up to the expectations or to the pledges that they have submitted under the Paris Agreement. It's almost, I would say, I mean, almost the whole world. We are seriously lagging behind. So this is also a common effort, but definitely also a question of will. I think that in this connection, it's also important to mention awareness raising, which is something I personally think is extremely important in the Western Balkans. From traveling in the region, it really hit me how much people are unaware of the situation when you compare to, for example, the EU. Now, I'm from Denmark, and I think that in Denmark, over the past 20 years, there's been a huge development in awareness, where, for example, that's not 20 years ago, sorry, but when I was a child, issues of environmental issues were very much thought of as being part of sort of a leftist political movement, and that is no longer the case. And I think that in some countries, and here I'm also the Western Balkans, it's there's a serious lack of awareness among the public. And I think that if we manage to tackle this issue and we manage to inform the public, and this is also something that the EU is working on, the public will tend to exert pressure on the government, and they will also feel more inclined to work on these issues. This is something that we've seen in the EU with the youth movement in the last years. That they had a huge impact, much bigger than many predicted, on climate policy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, that's really a good point, that this pressure has to come also from bottom up. So, Kristina, for an NGO like yours, still quite a bit of work, I guess, to do. The Green Agenda indeed explores this early inclusion of the Western Balkans in the emissions trading scheme. We already talked about it with Kristina. It reads, and I'm quoting, the Western Balkans partners would require significant technical assistance and administrative capacity building in order to reach a stage where this could be feasible. Is that actually feasible? Kristina already also said a few things about it. And what will the Commission do to help the countries in the Western Balkans to be able to implement an emissions trading scheme in their countries?
What's written in the Green Agenda is definitely feasible. Again, it's a matter of will. But like Kristina said, it is, in my humble opinion, unlikely that the Western Balkan countries will manage to align with the EU ETS in time for example, the CBAM. I don't see that as a possibility. But they will need to align with the EU climate acquis, meaning the EU climate legislation. And the ETS is part of this legislation. So before becoming members of the EU, they will need to align with the ETS, and the countries are working in that direction. I mean, 4 of the countries are candidate countries to basically negotiating to become members of the EU, and 2 countries, Bosnia-Herzegovina and Kosovo, are future candidate countries. So it is a matter of time. Now, how long it will take is also up to the countries themselves. I think, I mean, I follow the development up close, and I think the development is going quite slow. We've seen some really positive development in Montenegro. They have implemented their own ETS. It should not be confused with the EU ETS, because it really is a Montenegrin ETS, basically built around a Montenegrin reality. But it is a first step, and Montenegro has clear plans to align with the EU ETS. So it's just a matter of time. The question is, how long? Personally, I hope not too long.
Yeah. No, clear.
But
and
it will be more than a few years.
Yeah, yeah.
I fear.
And then I wanted to zoom out again a bit. You are part of the international department of DG Klima, and we know, of course, and there's also a lot of talk about it recently, that the EU does not operate in a vacuum in the region, in the Western Balkans. Among others, China also invests there, and Russia, and China also still directs currently its funds towards these outdated energy facilities and the construction of new coal-fired power plants. It might change in the future, but still this is the case. The question is really, can the EU counterbalance Chinese investments? Also, the G7 summit of last weekend, in amongst others the energy sector, and how can we do that? Well, not an easy question, also politically difficult perhaps, but if you could say a few things on this issue, would be wonderful.
Yes, thank you. I was going to ask you how much time do we have. It's very, it's very difficult to compress these answers into a few minutes.
Yeah.
I am actually not very worried when it comes to China. I think that I must admit, I don't know the exact numbers, but both Russia and China are pretty good at propaganda. And if you actually compare EU investment in the area with Chinese and Russian investment, I'm sure that we don't come out all that bad. And I do think that the best future for the Western Balkans is a future with the EU. It's best for the EU, it's best for the Western Balkans. I think that we belong together. Having said that, I also think that the one positive thing to come out of the COVID-19 health crisis would be a shared commitment to build back better and to build back greener. Before COVID, the EU was pretty much alone with a very ambitious climate target and the idea of reaching climate neutrality by 2050. But coming out of the crisis, I mean, to our great contentment, we've seen many major economies and also smaller economies all over the world joining us in this goal. If they're not talking about climate neutrality, they're talking about carbon neutrality. If it's not 2050, it's 2060. We do see a massive movement all over the world, basically. This also means that we're all investing in new technologies. Kristina was talking about gas as a transition tool, but I'm talking about investment in general, in green technology, investing in new technologies. This is extremely important. And this also illustrates how bad of an idea it would be for the Western Balkans to invest in old technologies and to invest in fossil fuels and coal. It is simply not the future. And I realize that these countries have other issues on their agenda, and I understand that they have a different starting point and also certain financial challenges. But I think it's becoming clear to everyone that investing in old technology will only result in stranded assets in the future. And I often think of this sort of as a train at the train station. And I think the train with the green transition has already left the station. So what, do you want to be on the train, or do you want to constantly run after the train trying to catch up? I think it's a pretty good image of the situation. I'm sure Kristina would agree with me when I say that that it is really the only way forward. So in the long run, I'm not very worried.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Thanks. And also for this optimistic notes. And of course, we know also that the EU is going to back up some of this with the commitment to spend 30% of its external action funded on climate-related activities, and also has big technical capacity building programs. And I think actually that also brings us to the next speaker, Radovan Nikcevic. You are from the region, you're working with the Regional Cooperation Council, and that's one of these bodies that has been central in the preparation of the SOFIA Declaration, and also now is deeply engaged in, let's say, the action plan for its implementation. Before going into today's business, we were curious also, let's say, from a vision on cooperation and European integration in the region, to learn a bit more about the process to get to the SOFIA Declaration, and in particular, because you could probably talk for days about how you got to the SOFIA Declaration and the processes that came along with it, and probably lots of the insights you cannot even share with us. But to what extent did the outcome exceeded some of your expectations, perhaps, that you had before making this declaration? Radovan.
Yeah. Thank you, Louise. Good afternoon, everybody. It's really a pleasure to participate in this discussion. So thank you for having me here in this event. It's really a pleasure. Regarding your question about whether the SOFIA Declaration exceeded actually our expectation, I would say that it met our expectation. We did what we wanted to achieve. Namely, just for those who maybe do not know, in the beginning of 2020, Regional Cooperation Council, RCC, was invited to coordinate the entire process of preparation of political declaration through which we expected the Western Balkan leaders to translate the ambitious objective of the Green Agenda and to commit actually to these objectives. So it was a process that lasted a couple of months, mainly coordinated by us, but where the Western Balkan governments played really the crucial role. We wanted to have this regional ownership, because maybe to simply make Western Balkan governments aware on the expectations of the objectives of the European Green Deal translated through the Green Agenda, just to have them from the onset deeply involved in this process. The consultations also included various regional organizations that have certain mandate in policy areas embraced by the Green Agenda, like the energy community, like transport community, also including standing working group that is active in the area of agriculture. So also besides these organizations, the process included NGO community, because the role of NGO sector is recognized by the Berlin process. And of course, we really strongly believe that a huge potential knowledge and experience exists in the NGO community and should be properly utilized or harnessed through the implementation, through the process of preparation of SOFIA Declaration, but also in the future. And this is actually what is defined in the draft action plan that we are working on. And another important thing is also that international financial institutions were involved and consulted during the process of preparation of the SOFIA Declaration. So after several rounds of consultations, several iterations, actually, we prepared this draft, which is finally, as we all know, adopted by the Western Balkan leaders on 10th of November in Sofia. Now it is up to all of us really to somehow ensure that these promises that are on paper only so far, really to translate them into concrete action and to ensure that they are transformed to results. It will be difficult. So far, I have to admit that somehow still the region is a bit lazy, or there is some kind of inertia in the region, and there is need to somehow ignite and start with activities for push. And that's actually what we are now going to do through the action plan that we are preparing.
All right. Yeah. So you were mentioning the region is sometimes a bit lazy. There is also still countries in the region that still subsidize coal. And recently the energy community started infringement procedures even against 4 countries, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Kosovo and North Macedonia, for not abiding to the targets they agreed upon in the so-called large combustion plants directive. What are the causes of non-compliance, and what can the EU learn from this experience to be able to see more compliance with the green agenda?
Oh, that's unfortunately that's true. There are still some activities that put kind of a shadow on all SOFIA commitments and that undermine these decarbonization ambitions. Talking about reasons, there are many, and I really can understand to some extent some of them. Reasons are economical, political, also technical, having in mind the importance of this stability and ensuring energy supply. But all these reasons cannot be treated or accepted as an excuse. So commitments are there. We simply promised to do something, to follow the same path as the EU member states, to go towards decarbonization by 2050. So this somehow has to be stopped. Of course, it requires time. It cannot happen overnight because simply, as I said, technical reasons are such, and we before turning off all fossil-fired power plants, we have to ensure stability and security of supply, stability of our energy systems. Regarding the several infringement procedures that you mentioned that energy community launched in the previous period, as a person who worked in the energy community and who was also in charge of preparation of some infringement letters a couple of years, 7-8 years ago, I can say that there is maybe one an unfortunate situation that all those infringement letters do not have enough power. The energy community does not have mechanisms, instruments to and kind of penalties in order to push contracting parties. So these infringement letters have rather kind of a warning nature and trying to somehow provide additional political push, but as I said, without concrete possibilities and concrete mechanisms to punish those who are breaching the energy community rules. Regarding the third question, what can the European Union do in this regard? I think that the Commission, the Union, is really doing a lot, and this should be mainly related to financial support and through, technical assistance and experience and knowledge sharing. Financial support is, to the great extent, ensured through the economic and investment plan for the Western Balkans, which is adopted in October last year, committing to support 9 billion euro in investments in supporting 10 flagship initiatives. Also, additional support will be provided through the upcoming EU-funded project 10 million worth, which is expected to be launched by the end of this year to support the implementation of the green agenda. So in this regard, there is already support. Also, 2 important projects that are already ongoing. Kristina is, I think, well aware about Tratolov project. There is another environmental partnership program for accession that are supporting somehow these comprehensive ecological transformation of the region already.
Also,
what is important is this knowledge sharing and technical assistance, which is always welcome, and which comes through the support of the European Commission and also through international community, including the Regional Cooperation Council.
Yeah, so there is already a lot going on, and also a lot of programs are in preparation. That's really great to hear. What then still probably is needed is this indeed paradigm shift in the ways societies and economies function, and also, let's say, the sense of urgency and political will. How do you look at it? It has already been raised in the contributions by Kristina and Stine. What could be done to foster this, or can it not be fostered, or what are your expectations with regard to that issue?
Yeah, as I said, we have so far, there is political commitment on the paper, but now we have really to ensure to move from promises to concrete actions, and that's what I mentioned at the beginning. We are now working on the action plan. This action plan should provide clear deadlines for every single measure stipulated in the SOFIA declaration. Also, through this action plan, we are developing roadmaps for all 7 components integrated in the Green Agenda as a clear, let's say, step-by-step guide on where to start from and what has to be done in order to achieve this ambitious objective. So the action plan will be developed for the next decade with certain periods for revision. We are working together with the Western Balkan governments, of course, as our main counterparts and beneficiaries of all our work. Also, the European Commission plays a crucial role in all this process. We cooperate closely with various partners active in the policy areas covered by the Green Agenda, such as energy, transport community, as I mentioned at the beginning. With this action plan, we also foresaw an important role of the civil society sector, and we recently, actually last week, we launched NGO forum, which will support the entire implementation of first of all, preparation of the action plan, and then implementation of the Green Agenda, and which will play a certain role also in annual reporting and monitoring of the implementation. So with this instrument, we would like to provide kind of another different perspective, kind of voice of conscience, I would say. Not only us and the Western Balkan governments presenting our work as successful and I don't know, just as a laudable report of all our activities, but just to hear from another point of view what was good, what was not, and what can be improved. What is also important, I would also like to mention that this action plan is expected to be adopted by the Western Balkan leaders at the summit to be organized under the Slovenian Presidency of the Council of the European Union, to take place on 6th of October, if I'm not mistaken. So it will be actually the first anniversary of economic and investment plan for the Western Balkans. So good moment, good time to adopt action plan.
Yeah, certainly. I'm chairing actually a panel on the European Green Deal and the Slovenian Presidency this Thursday. So this is good intel for me to ask what they have in mind to do on the 6th of October. I saw actually that Stina raised her hand when you were talking about this issue of political will, but also the action plan. Stina, very quickly, would you like to?
Yes, it was just a really quick comment, and it wasn't really on the action plan, but it was related to the discussion on technical assistance and the various projects going on at the moment. I just feel that it's important to add in this connection the fact that all of the Western Balkan countries have a really big challenge when it comes to increasing the administrative capacity. And I think that this really should be on top of their agendas because all of the technical capacity projects that we have going on are worth nothing if it's all lost in the process, if we don't have enough people to teach, or if they leave before this project and the next, then we're sort of, I see Radovan nodding, then it's sort of, again, lost resources. And this was my only comment. Thank you.
Yeah, right. Thanks. Yeah, I also wanted to emphasize that if you are in the audience and you want to pose a question, I saw that we already had the first questions in the Q&A. Julia is watching them. I hope we have time, but it's also interesting for us to see what kind of issues come to your mind during these webinars. And that we can mention them and address them. So thank you again, Radovan. And then I would like to ask a few questions to Wouter. Wouter is my colleague, and he's really focusing on EU enlargement, really the Dutch expert on EU enlargement, now more and more on radio and television. So Wouter, how do you see the green agenda impacting on the relationship between the EU and the Western Balkans, and especially the enlargement process? Could the green agenda also be a kind of new impetus for this accession process, and how? What way? Please.
Well, thank you, Louise, for that interesting question, which we also searched to tackle in our paper. And I'll try to keep my answer short so we have adequate time for the Q&A. So what we foresee also in the paper is that the green agenda implementation will draw the region closer to the EU, because the countries become part of the same institutional arrangements. Basically, that's already happening with the Energy Community Treaty, of course. But as you discussed with Kristina, amongst others, also the potential inclusion in the emission trading scheme may take place as well. So the region is basically foreseen and has already committed to adopt policies similar to those of the EU and its member states, with similar targets, for example, on decarbonization. So this will lead to at least some form of alignment with the EU in combating climate change and protecting the environment, and that can, of course, lead to opportunities for cooperation on both government levels, for the private sector, and also when it comes to NGOs and civil society organizations. So there is a window of opportunity for enhanced cooperation, but I think we should also be a bit wary to expect the green agenda implementation to be the sort of the magical solution for all the problems that we currently see in the accession process, right, of the countries in the region. And the ability of that accession process to actually draw these countries closer to the EU currently seems quite low. That has to do with political engagement and real political will, I would say, from both sides, from both the EU and the countries in the region, in spite of the formal statements that are often quite positive. It also has to do with the speed of reforms on key issues such as the public administration, the rule of law, democratization. These are all things in which the process has not proved to be very effective. I mean, of course, it depends on from country to country, and we are seeing some improvements, but also some standstill and even backlash in some countries. Well, Serbia and Montenegro have both been negotiating with the EU for quite a number of years now under accession. Serbia 7 years, I believe, and Montenegro 9 even. They're not yet close to finishing those negotiations. When it comes to North Macedonia and Albania, they received a formal green line to open accession negotiations last year. But those have still not started, amongst others, because of some political issues. So yeah, climate and environmental cooperation, as foreseen in the Green Agenda, will lead to enhanced cooperation, most probably, and the EU can also play an important role in that. But the accession process as such, I would say it suffers from a number of structural issues, which will not only be solved by enhancing cooperation as part of the Green Agenda.
All right. Yeah. So this idea of kind of environmental peace building cooperation that we also see in the climate security work that we do is a bit difficult. And I think these are also issues that are addressed in the papers that are still to be published as part of this project. Also, how the energy sector maybe currently is also more prone to corruption and how it's related to free press and rule of law issues. Is there more to say on that, on how, let's say, this agenda links to the democratization and the, by the Dutch, very favorable rule of law issue?
Well, yeah, because I think that what the EU will need to make sure is that it's that the green agenda is implemented in a way that it's also contributes to the EU's objectives on the rule of law, on democratization, etc. And there's just to highlight one issue that we also wrote about in our paper is the financial aspect, right? The green agenda is part of the EU's economic investment plan, which we already talked about with Radovan a little bit. And the region will need substantial investments on climate, for example, in the energy sector to actually reach the decarbonization objective. So I think that the EU will need to ensure that its financial support for climate and energy reforms is actually well distributed to avoid potential corrosive effects. And that's something that we see in the region, but also sometimes in the EU, is that EU funds can actually perpetuate corruption if they're not administered in an accountable or a transparent manner, right? So I think it will be very important when it comes to finances, for example, for the EU to be strict on transparency, to be strict on issues such as public tendering, audits, and everything, to make sure that these funds are actually distributed in a open and competitive manner in line with EU regulations. So that's just one issue to highlight, and there would be more, but I think it would also be interesting to discuss some of the questions in the Q&A maybe.
Yeah. Let's move on. Maybe one last question to you. So you work a lot with the big think tanks in the region as part of our Balkan Hub project. The Clingendael's counterparts in the region. Did they have the expertise already on the green agenda, or is it still a relatively new topic for them?
Well, I actually, with these partners in the region, they were the ones, of course, having the expertise, and we were the ones who are in a very steep learning curve in the past year. So yes, for sure, there is a lot of expertise in the region within all sorts of NGOs and organizations and partners with whom we also cooperated on the papers that we're producing as part of this project. Now, the problem is that the SOFIA declaration as such from the Western Balkans governments does not mention civil society. So there is not really a formal role foreseen for civil society at the moment, whereas I would say it's actually crucial to bring in citizens and CSOs and local communities who, when it comes to, for example, environmental protection, probably have a wealth of knowledge and expertise available, as Radovan also already mentioned. So I would expect that this would only add to the acceptance of policies, but also enhance their quality. Let's see. So more importantly, we discussed a number of times. We discussed political will during this webinar, and the fact that some of the countries have difficulties to implement their obligations under the Energy Community Treaty. So I think it would be important to bring in civil society also, because my impression at least is that the actual will to move forward with decarbonization and environmental protection is for a large part also within civil society, and the many protests and petitions over environmental issues that we see in the region also shows that this does not only include organized CSOs, but also citizens at large, even though, as Tina also mentioned, awareness raising will still be necessary, as it will be in the Netherlands or elsewhere. So there are some mechanisms being put in place. As Radovan mentioned, the Civil Society Forum of the Berlin Process has discussed the issue extensively and also provided recommendations to the governments. And the NGO Forum, as being set up by the Regional Cooperation Council, is also trying to ensure adequate civil society involvement. And I hope the EU can also play a positive role in that.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is also what Radovan wanted to bring in. Yeah, all right. Let's move to Julia. Julia, I already noticed that there were a few questions in the chat. Maybe you can, in the Q&A, maybe you can already mention them. And then we will go to Kristina, who probably also wants to say something about the civil society role in the Western Balkans. But first, Julia, can you summarize maybe the questions or the issues that were raised by participants of this webinar?
Yes, thank you, Louise, and thank you very much to everyone who posed questions and very useful remarks. So we have a very interesting remark from Claudio Bellis. He speaks about the fact that an important driver for decarbonization is actually air pollution, because it has a very bad impact on human health, especially in the Western Balkans, where the mortality rate is one of the highest in the region. So I think this is a very important issue that we need to take into account. And then I will move to the question posed by Martin Ferver. Apologies for my bad pronunciation. So he raised a very important issue as well, the one on energy security. And he rightfully argues that the transition to green energy sources would perhaps make the Western Balkans less dependent on foreign energy sources and hence on political pressure. And this question may be for Stine, maybe. So Stine, I would like to ask you, do you think the Western Balkans would be able to achieve a green and sustainable energy security without the help of the EU? And if so, do they have the economies of scale to do so? Over to you, Stine.
Well, I am not an energy expert, I must admit, but I will try to answer the question nonetheless. The question was whether the Western Balkans will be able to do it without EU assistance. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Well, I think that certainly they can, but it will take much longer. And the fear is, of course, that if we don't help, somebody else will. That's the geopolitical aspect of this discussion. I think that the Western Balkans could benefit greatly from our help. But as I also said earlier, it's not only the Western Balkans that can benefit from our help. We really need each other, and the Western Balkans belong in the club, so to speak, as members of the EU.
All right, thanks. I think Radovan also wants to say something about that, and then I'll go to you, Kristina. Radovan.
Yes, maybe I can complement a bit answering this question as a person who spent more than 2 decades in the energy sector in the Western Balkans. Despite the fact that renewable energy is heavily promoted, and of course, no doubt about the importance of renewable energy, simply this is ensuring energy stability is a multi-dimensional puzzle, and we really cannot do it overnight. As I said in my previous intervention, the whole energy systems, all energy systems of the Western Balkans have to be properly planned because of many issues. For example, of the market value of renewable energy today. For example, wind energy market value is market factor is below 1 because of this intermittent nature of the renewable energy. So it is not easy to switch. If we are able even to switch tomorrow, to turn off all coal-fired power plant tomorrow, it will not be able simply to replace physically with renewable capacities, because we have to think about how to ensure balancing of the energy system. So it's not an easy puzzle, but whether an easy task, but whether it is possible, I think yes, but it requires, besides a huge investment and intensive social measures and social policy, it requires a lot of time.
All right, clear. I saw, by the way, Radovan, in the Q&A, sorry for taking over, Julia, that there is somebody who asks how interested CSO can become part of the Regional Cooperation NGO Forum. So maybe you can think about a short answer to that, and then I'll give the floor to Kristina, who I think also wanted to come on the civil society role in the green transition in the Western Balkans. Kristina.
Yes, thanks, Louise. I actually also saw these questions in the Q&A, and I thought they were very interesting, and I also wanted to briefly maybe touch upon. Just a comment to Mr. Berber. I'm very glad that you mentioned the energy security aspect, we know that the Western Balkans has especially a lot of sunlight, a lot of potential when it comes to solar energy. And I agree with Radovan that it's not an easy task, but this is where I connect to my previous answer that we should focus on renewables and not on gas. So not only on wind and solar, we also need to think about storage. We also need to think about energy efficiency. And then we also need to change our legislative framework so it could be more friendly towards prosumers. And if all these things come together, then of course, we then could be very close to being self-dependent when it comes to energy. So that will be a very good thing for the Western Balkan countries, I think. And a very brief comment also to Mr. Belize. I think his question was on the health issues that I mentioned also before. And I would say that in this regard, regarding air pollution, there is actually a lot of awareness. We mentioned awareness rising before, but in the winter, we all see how polluted our air is that we're breathing, and everyone the citizens are putting pressure on the government, but still actions are very slow. So of course, this is a very important driver, and I hope that in the green agenda, in the action plan, it will be also specifically addressed. And just very brief on civil society. Of course, the civil society is the watchdog. It should be there to put pressure on implementation and monitor how it goes. But I would also learning from previous experiences, I would also be cautious not to have a pro forma participation, just have a CSO there just to check a box that they were there, but to actually provide spaces for their involvement and ownership in the whole process. So maybe this NGO forum, I believe that this is a very good sign that things might be done differently this time.
All right, thanks. And that also brings us back to the question, Radovan, how can you become a member of this NGO forum?
Okay, I would like first of all to complement what Kristina said about the energy efficiency. I think this is a powerful tool and should be the first step in our energy transformation, because with implementing energy efficiency measures, we can significantly decrease our energy needs. Then we can simply ensure this energy transformation which is ahead of us. Regarding the membership in the NGO forum, I just wanted to say to comment what Walter mentioned. Yes, he's right. The civil society forum is not mentioned in the SOFIA declaration, but actually there is a whole chapter in our action plan dedicated to NGO forum, establishing the NGO forum. We didn't share this, and both Walter and Kristina, I think, participated in the first NGO forum last Wednesday. We didn't share this draft action plan with the NGO society, but because we wanted first Western Balkan governments to see it and to send us their comments. But we will do this certainly. About how can someone participate in the work of the NGO forum, we identified, actually that's something what I was doing in the previous months, we identified around 70 relevant NGOs from the Western Balkans, but also some of the important NGOs or networks from the European Union member states. We invited all of them, and of course we are still open for others who are interested to join. So please drop an email to me, and we can include other NGOs in our future work.
Wow, that's wonderful. An invitation to contact Radovan and see if you can become included. I'm afraid we already ran out of time, and we always promise at Clingendael that we do short webinars so that people don't have to free up too much of their time. And that also means actually that I've already have to go to the closure. I would really like to thank you, Kristina Radovan. I know that you're very busy times, that you're working very hard on the implementation of the SOFIA declaration, and we really appreciated your presence. Kristina, we not only appreciated very much your presence today, but we appreciated even more that you worked with us so closely to write the policy brief, Energizing Enlargement, a short policy brief outlining the issues at stake. Very well written, so I recommend everybody to read it. Actually, I was one of the reviewers. I would also like to thank Wouter and Julia and the colleagues at the Clingendael office, Inge, for their contribution to today's webinar. I would like to thank also all the participants. Please stay tuned. Clingendael will organize more activities, publications on this topic, but also more general on the external dimension of the European Green Deal. We're now starting up some work on India, on Kenya, on Kazakhstan. And we are very interested in the climate security links, and we will also continue with our work on the Western Balkans, also on other topics, not only the green agenda. So please register for the Clingendael newsletter, then you stay updated. Follow us online through Twitter. Yeah, I hope to stay also in touch, because what we also appreciate and also appreciate with these kind of activities is to really learn from the people working in the policy domain, in the field, NGOs, this is how we hope to be as policy relevant as possible. And I think with regard to the green agenda for the Western Balkans, still a lot of work is to be done. We saw some tricky dilemmas today on CSOs, on the CBAM and ETS issue. So thank you again. I also noticed that my child just marched into my living room, so I really have to stop here. Thanks, and hope to see you back at one of our future events. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.